Hello everyone, welcome to Love and Philosophy. This is Andrea. Today we are talking about bioregionalism with Felix de Rosen. And bioregionalism is a philosophy that looks at sustainable boundaries, thinking of them as organized around more naturally defined areas, which they call bioregions, instead of the ways we tend to divide politically, for example, or even geographically. So it's a different kind of philosophy of how we're thinking about space, and it's a lot related to complex systems, which makes a lot of sense because Felix is a landscape architect and he's also a gardener. He's published books about gardens, very beautiful books, which I'll link to in the show notes. We talk about how he got into this, his education through Harvard in a completely different subject, and how he ended up finding his way to the land, or also just to finding a group of people that he understood and that understood him. If you listen to the last episode with Hannah de Jager, we actually talk about these same issues from a more philosophical perspective and thinking about loving and knowing. We mention these ideas of complex systems, so I thought it's good to go ahead and publish this conversation with Felix because we really go into the more natural side of our connections to life and what that means, but we also talk about it through similar themes to what Hannah and I talked about in terms of finding the people who understand you and how this can be hard to do. So this gets us into thinking about what community is, how we might think of it differently, what we might learn from gardens and gardening in that system, in that regard, because gardens are complex systems before we name them that, and people who are working with the land are working with complex systems, no matter if we call them complex systems or think of them through that literature or not, because those are just words and ways we've tried to understand what's actually happening in life. I think it was in the Kevin Kelly episode I talked about planting some flowers and that we had tried to plant some vegetables, and one of the things we planted were sunflowers, and they grew huge. I mean, they're really huge, taller than the first floor. So I've never seen sunflowers grow so huge, but they also became very heavy at the top where the bloom is, so they're sort of starting to fall over. And I thought about that in this conversation because Felix talks about himself and how as he was growing and learning so much, he was very smart, and he says he got very top heavy. And I was thinking of that in terms of the sunflowers, of how the seemingly most beautiful part, this bloom, this huge bloom that comes out at the top, makes it top heavy, and then it starts to bend over and it sort of needs some help. We had to kind of help it stay straight. But it still looks for the sun, and sometimes it even curves back up and finds the sun. So I don't know, I was thinking about that in this conversation because Felix talks about growing up between worlds. He's French and American, and I think a lot of you will understand what that's like when you're growing up between languages. You can feel like you don't fit in at all. It made me think of this friend of mine, Jane Sue. I don't know where she is in the world these days, but she was a friend of mine when I was a kid, and I remember thinking how strange it must be for her because she went home and spoke one language with her family, and her family didn't actually speak English, or not very well. They were learning. And then she came to school and was only speaking English. I just say that because there's a lot of us living in a lot of different worlds, and Felix talks about that in a really interesting way here, and about this feeling of alienation that also can come growing up in suburbia in the United States, which I know very well, this kind of strange feeling where you don't feel quite connected to anything. You're always in a car or an air-conditioned room or something, and it can feel very alienating. And as a kid, you have no idea that this is happening, but there's a very sensory state to it, at least that I remember very well, and I think others might too. And it's interesting to hear Felix talk about that and how he realized that and then sort of found ways of dealing with it. Something else he says, I think, that's very, very interesting and that's come back to me a lot since I've re-listened to this conversation over the past week or two, is he talks about how we don't have to solve the world. It just needs to be tended to. I think that's a really interesting idea to hold in mind, at least for me, where it seems like you want to solve problems or make things better somehow when it's caring for them, or just these very small changes and additions and subtractions of life that make all the difference. So this one is about gardening, landscapes, the way we think of space, systems, how systems thinking helps us hold contradictions, and finding the people that understand you. They are there somewhere. So keep looking if you haven't found them yet. If you have, appreciate them, because that's what we're here for. All right, here we go. Hi, Felix. Thank you for being here today. It's great to see you. I just thought maybe I'll let you introduce yourself. What would you like for people to know about you?
Hi, Andrea. I'm first of all very happy to be here. Thank you for sharing this time for this invitation. And thanks to the readers and listeners for also participating. So my name is Félix de Rosen. I am a French human, French-born human, raised in the US, pretty global citizen, working at the intersection of ecology and systems change. And also a really passionate, curious explorer of ways of being in right relationship with reality.
An important idea right now. You seem to have a very deep source of knowledge that is with the natural world, so called, if we want to try to distinguish it like that. And so I wonder about that, about your experience of how you've gained knowledge through your relationship with the natural world. And I wonder if you might talk about that a bit. Or so first, knowledge. Where have you mostly gotten your knowledge from in life?
So starting with knowledge, it's a big questions. One of the more helpful frameworks in my life is understanding that um, as a human being, I have a certain distinct set of characteristics, but I'm also part of a wider fabric of nature. So, um, looking at a tree, or looking at an animal, or looking at a wave, um, or looking at the movement of clouds, I see certain patterns that are replicated in my body, in my emotions, in different ways. And this is, nothing new. This is what animistic and shamanic cultures have, in many ways, been working with since time immemorial. And in many ways, it's the common shared spirituality of humanity. And this way of knowing the world also is present in the monotheistic religions too, just with more layers of of, um, of ceremony or of doctrine in between that sometimes confuses things. Um, so I get my knowledge by understanding that there's a fundamental interconnection between humans and the living world. We are a fundamental core part of nature and not separate from it. And it's obvious. Maybe it sounds obvious to say it, but it needs to be repeated because we live in a world right now where our dominant culture is really sending us a lot of messages that humans are um, really not part of nature. Like nature is where we go out on holidays and have picnics, and then we spend the rest of our lives in cities and in offices. um,
I'm really interested in sort of where you were as a child and what nature was for you in terms of how you came in to know yourself or know the world, and how that connected into what you wanted to study in these systems of education.
yeah, so I mean, I grew up in very I grew up in American suburbia. I was born in France, um, and I grew up in a French-speaking household in the US. So it was a little bit schizophrenic because I was speaking French at home, and then would go to school with my American kids friends, and I was usually the only um, non-American there. And I we would go back as a family to France every year. So I had also an experience of really living in between two cultures. And the reality is I never really felt like it belonged to either. I was always the French kid in the US and the American kid in France. And so I think from a very early age, I did not identify primarily with the cultures around me. I didn't have that luxury. It would have been beneficial for me in some ways, to be honest.
You really didn't identify with either one? Was it because you were between them, or not totally only in one, or?
It was because I did not see culture that felt really life affirming around me on either side of the Atlantic. It took me it you know, this relationship with nature, this relationship with the living world, did not come to me easily. It came, I wasn't interested really in a rigorous way in plants until my late 20s when I, went to graduate school. I, um, in my early 20s and mid 20s, I went through a period of really difficult physical health, and that's what started opening the doors um, to being in better relationship with the living world. So I was going through a lot of physical pain, a lot of chronic fatigue, and I had absolutely no resources to deal with it. Like, I mean, I could go to doctors and specialists, but it was totally unhelpful. And so I had to, learn by myself things, very basic things like, how to live healthily, how to take care of my body, how to eat well, how to understand myself better. And a lot of that process led me um, to the greatest source of rest and inspiration, which is, really the living world around us. I'm looking this way because I have a big window to a
Yeah, it
beautiful
just looks
landscape
like
here.
light. It's just light
Yeah.
pouring in. So you said this word life affirming, or two words, I guess. So as a kid, you didn't, I guess I'm guessing you didn't grow up in the middle of a glorious natural park or something, or did you? Or what was not life like? How, as a kid, how does that feel? Obviously, you felt it. Not that you would have said, "Oh, it's not life affirming" in those words, but what was it you were feeling then that you were missing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll use a philosophical term here. I'd say alienation.
Mm.
Um, American suburbia is, it's not unique, but it shares it's exported its model in many parts of the world, but it's very car focused. Um, it is a very inefficient use of land, and um, it optimizes for the individual, and I think the reality is that, that has served a really practical purpose. I don't want to discount the the positive aspects of giving people, a certain level of freedom and material well-being, but there's a limit to how much that works. And I think as a kid, I felt like there wasn't a larger vision in place in the culture that was really in tune with the full complexity of, I'd say, the world in general, but specifically, the region where we were living. And, you know, people make fun of the US for its strip malls, and these, dozens and dozens of miles of a kind of concrete lined boulevards with just shopping center after shopping center. And there's unfortunately there's a lot of truth to that, and that was hard it's hard to experience as a kid because I didn't have the language to really understand why I didn't like it.
In your work, you often talk in a very sensual way, and I think working with gardens. I mean, you've written this book, "What's the Purpose of a Garden?" or "The Purpose of a Garden." Yeah, you've
The
written about
garden's
gardens. You're a
purpose.
landscape architect. You're working in these issues of bioregionalism, which we'll get to. But there's always a sense of sensuality and of connection in what I've seen in your work, even if it's in the images that you choose, or and when I hear you talking about the alienation, it feels like the opposite of that. And I also remember from
Hmm.
my childhood where you come out of one box and you get into another one, the car, and there's a very different sensuality there that I remember as a kid. I couldn't have explained, but it does feel like alienation. What you were describing about your university years too, when you had this sickness, was that also a kind of alienation? Because you said no one could really help you. Is it similar to that feeling of almost being like in a separated from that sensual connection?
It was a big part of it. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of nuance and complexity to the story, but that is a core aspect of it.
And how did you
Is
find yeah, go ahead.
um very simply relearning what feels good and what doesn't, and then making decisions to change the course of my habits.
Was that a
And
mental like, noticing how you feel? Did you have to go to some meditation or something? Or how did you come into awareness of these
yeah, I
things?
mean, all every it was a it's well, first of all, I'll say that it's an ongoing process, right? It's like a lifelong
Yeah.
process. So it was, yeah, a lot of meditation, a some psychedelics and plant medicines, and ultimately finding community and friendly human beings who are capable of understanding me. And I always, it sounds, so na- simple and naive to say this, but it's like it is really rare it's important to find those people, because um, not everyone is capable of really working with you, understanding you. And it took me a very, very long time to realize that, oh, maybe I just haven't been hanging out with the right people. I did my undergraduate at Harvard University, and I went to Harvard because at the age of 17, I didn't know what to do other than to just go to what society told me was the best school around. Um, and it ultimately wasn't the best environment for me, because it's very, a lot of, not only but predominantly type A individuals who have a lot of intellectual resources, but a lot of growth, a lot of needed growth in the emotional realm. And so the environments that we find ourselves in is so important. What is there's this saying that you are the sum of the four closest people in your life, right? So I always think about that when I think about who am I surrounding myself with? What am I surrounding myself with?
Do you think of people as place? I mean, do you separate those? Of course, a person and the environment is different, but do you think of it as in the sense of what you're surrounding yourself with being what's going to contribute and orient you in your life? Is it all of that for you now when you think about a healthy surrounding?
Yeah, I think I mean I think my model is that humans are part of nature, and therefore people are part of place, whether they like it or not. Um, and but there's definitely a spectrum. There's the unique qualities of place, the landscape, the weather, the flora, the fauna, and that inevitably influences culture. Um, and it doesn't mean that everyone is totally in tune with the unique qualities of place, but usually there is some influence. So and some places have a deeper imprint on the mindset, the worldview, the spirituality of people. One of the things I really like about the San Francisco Bay Area, where I'm living right now, is that there is a really deep appreciation of place amongst many people here. There's also a complete disregard of place at the same time. So you have to you have to pick and choose what you dedicate your energy to.
So when did you start to realize how important these things are, place and the people that you surround yourself with? And nature, these issues, when did that start to become something that you were consciously prioritizing, thinking about?
Um, well, I think it happened in steps. I've I think always oriented towards the beauty of the living world. So I've always, liked to visit and spend time in beautiful places. Of course, visiting beautiful places and living a professional life and is not always don't always go hand in hand. So I have kind of learned to loosen slightly my grasp, my controlling tendency of wanting to optimize for place and community and work. Um, all of those are incredibly important to my well-being and to anyone's well-being. So I have learned to not be perfectionist about it. And the San Francisco Bay Area is a place that has been a very good home for my learning over the last 8 years now.
I guess I'm trying to understand how you got from that moment at Harvard where you were feeling what you just described, and yeah, how did you get from there to where you are now? Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that makes better. Yeah. Well, okay. Um, Really what happened was, I studied political science at Harvard. I had a brief career in marketing that didn't last very long. And 2016 rolled around, so that was 8 years ago or 9 years ago now. And 2016 was the year where I really started to dive deeply into, or to first dive deeply into the literature around climate. Uh, and where at the same time, I felt that I needed to take greater responsibility for um, my role within, like, on this planet. Um, Previously, I always felt a certain set of responsibility, but it was easy for me to just move around life and take a job here and take a job there and kind of, enjoy myself and learn a few things. And it was just, there wasn't really a lot of, um, I was missing at the time a deeper, like a framework to channel my energy. And so I really wanted to go back to school. And I looked at different types of programs. And, ultimately, I really just, I went through the exercise of writing down what are the things that matter the most to me. And there were three things. They were nature, beauty, and people. And that led me to study landscape architecture. So I was at UC Berkeley for 3 years. I got a Master of Landscape Architecture there. And it was very helpful because landscape architecture is a very unique discipline that is, on the one hand, highly practical. It is about making a path or a staircase or a fence or a structure or foods to eat in in a way that people can use it. And on the other hand, it's also deeply philosophical and spiritual and conceptual. And so it was very good for me because, especially at the time, I was very head in the clouds, great ideas. I'd read a lot of philosophy, um, and but it was very ungrounded.
Great ideas about how to save the world or something?
Yeah, or, like, things that the world, if only they knew this, or if only they understood this, then,
Mm.
things would be a lot better. And I think there's a certain point where I realized, like, I was very top heavy. Like, my knowledge was here, and I needed something to root it down in practical reality. And so that's why I oriented myself towards landscape architecture. Um,
To
And
actually build something, make it happen with your hands is very different than just to have all these grand ideas. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And after school, after graduating, it was mid-pandemic. I worked as a gardener. I worked as a landscape designer, as a like a garden designer, mainly for kind of wealthy residents of the Bay Area. I took on a few design jobs, designing installations, and ultimately, I realized that I needed to find some type of mid ground between the the um, the conceptual and the grounded and practical, between the system and systems thinking and place-based thinking. And that's how I ended up really orienting around the work that I'm doing now with the BioFi project, which is an organization which is um, one of the leading voices in um, bioregionalism, and the way that we go about it is by helping communities around the world um, develop tools that can welcome money, finance, capital into projects of social and ecological regeneration. So that's the journey in a nutshell.
Yeah. What is bioregionalism for those who've never heard of it? This is a idea I'm hearing a lot more
Hmm.
often lately, and I imagine it has very old roots. But this term, is it a new term? Is it an old term? What is it?
Yeah. Well, the caveat is, as Satish Kumar says, every ism creates a schism. So, bioregionalism is a beautiful word that describes both a practical applied philosophy and also an ecological philosophy um, that argue for organizing human societies according to the unique qualities of place. So, um, aligning economic activity and the stewardship of um, natural assets and governance, aligning all of those with the natural systems and cultures of place. And it's called bioregionalism because of the word bioregion. And bioregion is short for biocultural region. And what does it mean? It means, first of all, there's no one definition, um, but it broadly means a bioregion is a region defined by three characteristics, really: physical characteristics like climate and topography, ecological characteristics like soil, flora, fauna, and cultural characteristics like art and language. So a bioregion is in contrast to, say, a political or administrative boundary. And the reason why I find bioregionalism very interesting is because places have unique characteristics. Places, landscapes are the foundation of our lives, the foundation of our culture, the foundation of our economies, the foundation of the food we eat, um, of our energy. Everything that we do, everything that we wear comes from the land and the waters and the air, right? And I've gravitated towards this applied practical philosophy because we are living in a moment right now where we don't really have a choice but to reorganize ourselves pretty radically according to what the earth can provide, as opposed to what we are capable of extracting from the earth.
You said nature, beauty, people. That was what I guess you just write it down. That's what you cared about at that time or something. You just make a
Yeah.
note of it. And then did that just immediately make you think about landscape in the way that you just described, or
It
yeah?
actually made me think more. Initially, I was thinking more
Hmm.
about art practice. That was where I was orienting a little bit more in my earlier days. So I was visiting a lot of sculpture parks and looking at how art, could interact with nature. Um, but I I found myself more and more interested in looking at systems, looking at how the relationship between economy, ecology, culture, politics, and spirituality, they're all deeply interlinked. And um, Donnella Meadows, the brilliant American systems thinker. I think she's American. She has this essay about the different leverage points within a system, and she says that the most powerful leverage point ultimately is worldview. Worldview is at the heart of our models of understanding reality, the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis. And so I think I have tried to, in addition, like as part of my practical work, there has been a very strong element of storytelling and of changing the stories and worldviews. So they go together, right? The practical and the worldview. And this was really a core message in the book that I published well now like 4 years ago, which was looking at gardens as these very practical applied places and practices, and also seeing what were the embedded worldviews
Hmm.
in them.
You talk about values in the book, and I think you sort of divide it up. Is it wonder, design, habitat,
um,
something like that? Because all these
yeah, yeah.
elements that you've been describing are definitely in that book as a complex system, even the art.
Hmm.
And I guess that was on purpose to incorporate all of that, because there's also these stunning pictures of gardens and very different kinds of gardens, from rock garden. There's a lot of the complex system theme is there at many layers. So was that a kind of
Yeah,
conscious choice that you wanted to do a book like that?
absolutely. Well, I mean, the goal was really, how do we stop thinking of the garden as this little piece of nature that exists in our front yard or our backyard, and instead think of it as a way of being that is in fact everywhere, regardless of where we look. So, you know, the garden as this kind of white picket fence in the front and backyard in many ways is the problem.
Yeah, it's like the lawn or something. These things we just
Yeah.
assume are categories that exist that we don't change, and yeah.
Yeah, and so there's some very strong political reasons for why that is the image that we have of the garden. There's this a thinker that I really like, Vanessa Andreotti, has
Yeah.
this exercise, where she asks people, draw me corn, draw me a piece of corn,
Hmm.
and everyone draws a yellow corn with like these green stalks. Whereas in reality, most of the corn in the world, is like traditional corn is not yellow. It's multicolored. It's blue. It's green. It's white. It's red. And so we have, I think, a very normative, culturally conditioned understanding of what gardens are and nature are. And the book was really an attempt to really kind of ignite some other ways of thinking, specifically um, around to n- non-Western ways of appreciating gardens and nature, looking at indigenous cultures, but also um, looking at artists and how they have been thinking about like using materials in interesting ways, and also looking at places that are not in the core center of conventional discussions. In the book, I look at some of the gardens built by homeless people in Oakland.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a way what you're sort of describing is a cognitive shift, and it also seems to relate, I don't know, to the one that you were going through when you wanted to go back to school and you were thinking about nature, beauty, people. Did you develop a different way of seeing? It almost feels like you took a step back and saw the world differently, or saw your interrelations in a different way. Was that around the same time you started to think about complex systems, or had that already been part of your life? I guess I'm just wondering if that was going in parallel, that you were also beginning to see your place and what community meant to you in a different way at the same time that you were also literally starting sort of a new career that you would present, such as in that book, in that sort of complex view, that vision.
Yeah. I I'm not sure how to answer that. I'll try. I think that I was really trying to find my place uh, in this world, and then specifically in the professional, like in the professional world, like where I was recently out of school. It's like I need to work. What do I do? How do I leverage these design skills, this practical understanding of the world, with also the fact that it's very frustrating to work on a site when you know that the entire system around the site, you cannot do anything about it. And
Mm.
ultimately, it's the system that's impacting the site. So, if you're a landscape architect, you generally, not always, but you're given very clear site boundaries. And for me, that was just incredibly frustrating because I didn't want to just make one little place pretty. I at the at, I because that's also the danger of a discipline like landscape architecture, is that a lot of resources, a lot of energy are put into making one place look really nice, but then there's this whole shadow side where what allows that is extraction
Mm.
and outside of the site. And so I um I started just, I think, taking myself a bit more seriously, and understanding that I did have um, a desire to think in systems. It just took me a long time to find the right people and communities to people and communities that really could welcome that type of perspective.
It seems like something we really need right now is to be able to find a way into those kinds of communities. I mean, as I hear you talk, you were holding a lot of different things. So different cultures from your childhood and all these other things. You had the sickness, you had, obviously you were kind of excelling if you were doing so well in academics, but at the same time you seem to have still felt some alienation. So I think a lot of these things are themes that people feel right now. Maybe we always feel, but especially right now. And as you found in your life, the answer does come when you can find community where you can explore these things together in an authentic way, in a way I would maybe even bring up love a bit here, because in a way where you can help each other hold all of those things. And I think a lot of us have found ways to do this through complex systems thinking and through nature. And you're bringing those together. We're at a moment now where we need these kind of skills. Do you see how this journey that you've been on, have you maybe even in spite of yourself learned a practice that you might now see as very important? Is it helpful in these times? Of course, I know it's an ongoing process, but does that make any sense?
Is a particular practice helpful, or the practice of political science?
Being able to see the world through the lens of the complex system, and being able to understand the interrelation of what you're thinking about and orienting towards, and nature and community.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I don't. I mean, I think it's absolutely critical to have a systems understanding of the world. Yes, That doesn't mean that everyone should do that. I think it's a very helpful tool. But, not everyone. There's also nothing wrong with just being a gardener or having a more. I really believe that it's not about the what, it's more about the how that we're doing, right? A lot of times people ask like, well, what can I do to make the world a better place? And it's just like, well, what can you not do? It's like you have a capacity to impact within what you're already doing, whether that's being in an office or being an artist or being in government. I think what systems thinking brings that is particularly helpful is it's a certain realism. Our challenges as a civilization right now are actually very, very complex. And systems thinking allows us to recognize that complexity so that we're not naive about our responses. Systems thinking also allows us to hold contradiction, um, because um, it allows us to hold contradiction and to not have simple stories that we use as psychological crutches that in fact don't lead to an honest relationship with reality. And so I'm a really big advocate in what Donna Haraway calls staying with the trouble, which is essentially another way of saying that we have to learn how to be with uncertainty, with difficulty, with challenges, and we have to learn to love them. And a large part of the problem of the world today is that we first of all, I think that we think of solutions. We think the world has to be solved, and I don't think that's a helpful framework. I think the world has to be tended to, but there's a certain violence to actually wanting to solve um, very complex problems. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to get at a bit too, because yes, not everyone needs to be calling themselves a systems thinker or studying complex systems or whatever. These are just words we put on a lot of ongoing actions. But I think a gardener is already working with what we're calling complex systems. I mean, that's so many layers of living, ongoing life. They probably understand it better than people who've just studied complex systems. So it might even be it's another path into being able to hold the
Mhm.
paradox or hold these contradictions, which seems to be a theme in a lot of people's lives right now that's helping them, like to be able to take that step back and be able to hold what seem impossible or seem irreconcilable, I guess. Is bioregionalism, how do I connect it to that idea of, because right now it does seem hard to hold all of this. We might have on the one hand tariffs, like blocking out all of this ongoing interconnected stuff. And at the same time, we do have this push to be in our region and connected to the place where we are. And there can just be a lot of messages of that we're trying to hold that can seem contradictory. And I wonder, in your work with bioregionalism and with polycultura, if you've seen all these differences that you're having to hold, if you found new ways of holding them, especially these very extreme dichotomies, for example, in the United States of uh, left and right, or us and them, in whatever way one might put it.
Well, I think that I'm gonna do my best to answer that question because there's a lot there. One way of thinking about bioregionalism is really as a social process of bringing the inhabitants, the citizens of a landscape, of a bioregion, of a territory, of a watershed, bringing them together and asking, how do we build a common vision for this place? Um, to ask that question is not just a playful exercise, although it should be a playful exercise. It's deeply existential. Not asking that question means relying on systems that are destroying the planet and us along with it. So in that social process, we confront all the messiness and contradictions of human beings. We confront business interests that have a certain set of incentives with the interests of government and municipal authorities, which confronts with the interests of homeowners, families, artists, scientists, academics, white collar workers, blue collar workers. Like um, there's there's a lot there, and they need in a way to develop a coherent vision. And um, a lot of the work that needs to be done in the process of bioregioning is really creating a participatory process where people feel invited to engage with a messy situation. And that's a like no one want like few people want to do that, right? Because we've been sold a model of politics where the way that we have agencies by voting once every 4 or 5 years. That's absurd when you think about it. It's a delegation of our responsibility instead of an assumption of agency. And so I consider bioregionalism as um, a way to rekindle the fire of agency, to rekindle the desire to work with messy, complex systems that have been getting messier and more complex because they are not in our hands. Um, which is why people go hungry in the US now when a supermarket relying on global supply chains um, um, doesn't have chicken and eggs in stock because of some influenza happening on the other side of the world. We're incredibly fragile. It's such a fragile system, and we don't really realize it because we're putting so much resources into upkeeping it. And so we really need to wake up to that. The problem is that everything, all the signs, all the cues right now are to just keep on going. I hope that sort of gets at what you're asking.
Yeah, it does. And I just also was hoping to get at, I don't know what question to ask exactly, but the left, right, up, down kind of perspective shift that you've had. So, in your work with bioregionalism and these other things we've been talking about, what ways have you found to actually bring people together towards regenerative actions that can actually make a difference to some of these problems?
Yeah. Well, I think the most helpful way is to focus and believe in a shared set of human desires and wants that are more powerful than our differences. And I know it sounds a little cliche, but I do think it's really true that if you look at the political spectrum, the left-right distinction, um, that model seems increasingly out of date. And for example, progress the political and cultural left usually believes in social welfare, community well-being, um, progress, ecology, um, and a state to support that. Whereas the right, believes usually in a more traditional set of values, um, uh, more of a rural focus. And so, there are, if you look at these distinctions, there actually are some very strong common points that actually bioregionalism gets to the heart of. Bioregionalism, for example, really calls for a relocalization of our economies and our governance systems, so that it's the people in a place that start to really make decisions about what's beneficial for them in that place. This is where left and right actually find incredible synergies, where the desire for progress and ecological stewardship meet of the left meet the desire for local identity, for tradition of the right, where the left's desire for sustainability meets the right's desire for relocalization. And so instead of left and right, it's much more helpful to think about bottom and up. Bottom being me and up being we. And when you think about it that way, there are people on the right who want we just as much as people on the left. There's nuance to that, of course, but I think this model is helpful. And one of the really exciting projects I'm working on right now is to take the principles of bioregionalism as articulated through the organization that I work with, the BioFi project, to literally rewrite that language into into the language of conservative America, so that we can start publishing materials that can bring conservatives into alliance with us, because we're no like the enemy is no longer them. Like we're not enemies. If there's I don't like the word enemy, but if there's an enemy now, it's really oligarchy, and so there's inevitably going to be, and this applies for Europe as well and across the world. There's going to be increasing amounts of dissatisfaction on people who formerly identified as being on the right with the way that politics are going, and there's really a lot of really interesting efforts and initiatives happening all across the world, and particularly in the US, around post-partisan politics, which is really what bioregionalism is about. It's like, okay, let's get over the tragedy, and let's start working together because we don't have a choice anymore.
That's beautiful. Do you in your work, have you seen that this can also go across typical national lines? That these communities can find each other internationally rather than
Oh,
only, yeah.
absolutely. I mean, some of the bioregional projects that my organization works with are international, the work across international lines. Just to give you two examples, one is called the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance, and that's an alliance of many indigenous tribes that are across the borders between Peru and Ecuador. And then another one is the Cascadia bioregion, which stretches from California to Canada all the way to Alaska. So people are working across national boundaries.
That really does feel like the future, not thinking left, right, or even this country, that country, but more in these layers of what you described as up and down, but as we're all nested together in a way.
And I would add also, it's not about like replacing government, like the existing institutions of government. It's more about adding another layer that can hopefully work. We have to be in relationship with government. So we're not creating a totally parallel system.
No.
So we have to work we do work with different types of municipal authorities and different types of official government institutions.
I imagine your training in design helps you there because you learn how to work with what already is to reorient it in certain ways. Last question, because I know you need to go. I have to bring up the word love, and I wonder if that's too hard to bring into this conversation of bioregionalism, or if you see a connection to your own motivation or to the motivation you see around you.
Yeah, no, I mean, we could have a whole conversation just about that. Um, I deeply believe that we human beings are, we are creatures and animals of the earth. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we have, for millions of years, evolved in proximity to living landscapes. We are, our organs, our minds, our bodies are all shaped in relationship to gravity, to flora and fauna, to shifting weather patterns. So our relationship with the earth is ancient, and our you can't really. I think if you take a human being and you put them in an urban concrete jungle, it there is something missing there. So I think there's a role for cities. Bioregionalism is not just a rural process. It's actually it's about integrating rurality and urban life. But a human being that is, I think, divorced from other forms of life, more than human forms of life, I think is fundamentally alienated. And so love is really in this context, love is our recognition of our deep interdependence with the earth. That you it is I used I it the earth is our mother. It is where we come from. And we have long lived thinking that we can just take and in a way live on its surface, but we are not on the surface of the earth. We are in the earth, right? And the earth also extends, the atmosphere extends, I don't know how far up, but it extends pretty far up, and we are really in it. And I think bioregionalism is largely, it's beyond being like a social and political and ecological philosophy. It's also a recognition um, that we come from place and we go back to place. Yeah.
That's beautiful, and we always are that place too. It's strange. Alienation is such a difficult thing that we've all felt in different ways, and it's even more tragic because it's just that we haven't understood that connection or been able to relax into it or trust it or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would say, I don't, I'm very careful about not fetishizing or romanticizing indigenous cultures. Um, but anyone who has spent significant time with indigenous cultures realizes that, you know, and I'm generalizing here, that they have a much longer relationship with Mother Earth than we do. And I say we, I'm talking about myself and people from kind of the urban West industrial civilization. We are only a few generations removed from that. So it's actually very much alive in us. If we it's evolutionarily programmed in us. So it comes back, I think, very quickly. And bioregionalism, in this sense, is nothing new. We have been bioregioning since we've been human beings, in the sense that we have been learning how to be in place. It has just come up as a term recently, starting in the 70s, but now with a kind of a renewed emphasis because of the polycrisis and the times we're living in. It has come up with renewed emphasis because we realize that we need to that we are indigenous to this planet, and so we need to find and create ways of recreating social, economic, political systems in line with that.
That just reminds me of the way we started with getting out of one box and into the other box in the car, and how that's from what you just described with the indigenous kind of way of being in the world. That's still part of us. Maybe this is some way that we can understand that those kind of systems actually do have a direct effect on how, what's possible for us, how we feel, what we want, and how we build the future, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really like, there's a term that's been helpful that a friend of mine introduced me to, which is ADD, which stands for Agency Deficit Disorder. And it's a way of speaking about how one of the biggest struggles we have today is in the lack of a sense of agency. And we need to create support systems for each other. We need to signal to each other that we can work together, and we need to do so at scale. I think that type of signaling, the stories we share, are and the kind of the aesthetics also of how we share that are really an important thing to pay attention to today.
Does that give you hope when you see that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think we have all the resources and all the capacity to change things. We just need to actually believe that we can.
Wonderful. Well, you and your colleagues are showing ways we can do it. So how do we connect with you, or how do people find out more?
I am So the organization I work with is called the BioFi Project. So there's our
I'll put all
website,
the okay.
biofi.earth, and that's the main way. Yeah, I have my own personal artistic design website, which is polycultura.com. That is interesting and fun to explore as well.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk to you, and I really appreciate everything you've said today. I think you made some really resonant points there that will be helpful. So thank you, and thanks for the work you do, and good luck.
Thank you, Andrea. I feel like we could keep on talking for a long time, and I hope this is not the last conversation.
Yeah, I think we were just getting warmed up, to be honest, but that's the time we had for today. But let's just hit pause for now and come back another time. All right, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrea.
All right, be well.
Bye.
Bye.